responsible for our taxes. With us, we have Sanjay Kumar Agarwal, Chairperson, Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, Special Secretary, Ministry of Finance as well, another Special Secretary as well, Ravi Agarwal, Chairperson, Central Board of Direct Taxes. Welcome to you both, sir. And let me start with you, Mr. Ravi Agarwal. In terms of the kind of changes that have been made to direct taxes, both in the new income tax regime as well as the changes that have been made for capital gains tax, what has been the thought process? Because there is a basket where you've lost something and then there's a basket where you've gained.
Yeah, so first I'll come to the tax slabs. So we had actually come up with this new tax regime, and the new tax slabs were introduced only with effect from April 24, and now further relaxations have been provided in the two slabs. Because earlier it was till 3 lakhs there was no tax, and then from 3 to 6 was 5%, 6 to 9, 9 to 12, 12 to 15, and 15 above. Now the first two slabs have been sort of changed, and now it is 3 to 7, 7 to 10, 10 to 12, and so on. As a result of that, suppose a person is having income of say 15 lakhs, the person stands to gain about 10,000 in terms of the new tax slabs that are being proposed in the budget. And in the context of salaried class, if you add standard deduction, then the benefit becomes all the more, right? So
probably till about 8 lakh per annum you don't pay any taxes.
Yeah, so effectively 75,000 is the standard deduction. So 7 lakhs and 75,000. So all taken together for this thing, the tax rate is negligible. So this is as far as the tax slab is concerned, and of course this benefits all across, because ultimately
those who are in the new tax regime, not for the old.
Yes, so those who are in the new tax regime, and let me share that people are adopting the new tax regime because it's beneficial to them. As much as about 65% of the people,
two-thirds of people,
two-thirds of the people have already adopted this new tax regime, and that is cutting across all the boards. It's not you see simple taxpayers or in ITR 1, but all across the taxpayers are adopting.
And is it also a signal that the old tax regime will pretty soon be a thing of the past?
Well, we are seeing, since there is a lot of traction, and so far as the new tax regime is concerned, and we are providing a lot of incentives in the sense that tax incentives and so on, even for the companies also who are adopting this new tax regime, the rate of tax is lesser. So therefore, there is a lot of traction, and we hope that going forward, once a substantial percentage of the people are onboarded, then we can see how we actually take care of the old one. Right. Because ultimately the philosophy of the government is that instead of reductions and exemptions, we should move ahead and make it simpler.
Right. And so staying with direct taxes, the short-term tax gain, the long-term tax gains, yes, those levels have also been changed. There is an exemption for the middle class up to 1.25 yes, lakh per year. Help us understand the manner in which the argument for the change in the tax slabs work. Yeah, so one, there was a requirement and there was ask from both from the taxpayer side as also from the government. You see, the government felt that the capital gains regime has to be made simpler. You see, earlier the capital gains regime had different parameters. So in the context of long-term capital gains, there was something like one parameter was holding period. So there was a holding period of 1 year for some assets, then there were 2 years for some assets, and 3 years some assets, which was basically difficult, you see, to keep to administer that. So now it is only 1 year and 2 years. 1 year is for the financial assets, and 2 years is for the non-financial assets. There is a very clear distinction between the two. The second is the rate of the tax. So long-term capital gains, it's 12.5 all across the board. And other than that, for short term, of course, it is 15 to 20 that has been increased, but otherwise, you see, it's a normal rate of tax. So the tax structure that way has also been simplified. The third was indexation. Now, indexation was also one factor, but for non-financial assets, this was basically indexation was yet one more factor, so which has been done away with. But instead of 20%, the tax rate has been brought down to 12.5%. Right, which is a substantial benefit that one gets. So the idea is that we make it simple for the taxpayer.
to actually comply. Now, there could be some concerns that with doing away with indexation, maybe some taxpayers may feel that they are being put to a disadvantage, but that is not the case.
I think it was the real estate sector that took the biggest hit in the markets today.
Exactly. So therefore, I have some examples which I can actually bring forth. So suppose a property was purchased in 2014, right? And we have held this property for 10 years, let's say, right? Now, if you go for this indexation, it would provide 1.5 times, it would scale up the value of the property for which it was acquired. So suppose it is about 1 lakh. So by virtue of indexation, it would be 1.5 lakhs. And then of course you reduce it by the sale consideration to arrive at the capital gains. Now if you calculate the tax, you see, in context of from the old regime and the new regime, what one finds is that if in these 10 years, the property rate has gone by 3 times, right? If it has gone more than 3 times, the new tax regime is helpful. The rate of the tax liability is lesser as compared to the old tax. The reason being that the index cost is much lower, you see. But actually the property rates have gone up. In these 10 years, the property rate would not be 3 times, it will be more than that. Yes. That's a practical thing. So therefore, when you see it from the practical point of view, this the taxpayers stand to gain.
Then there are other people who are saying that this is like inheritance tax through the back door. Is that a complete misconception?
No, there is nothing of that sort, because ultimately 2001, the fair market value of the property, that's a cutoff. And then that indexation would start from there. So that cutoff is already available. The other is that the rollover is also available. So if you have actually disposed of a property and you want to purchase a new property, that provision still remains.
Right.
Then of course I will not pay capital gains because I'm reinvesting in the property.
Yes.
Sanjay Kumar Agarwalji, if I can come to you, talk about indirect tax as well. Several key interventions, tax breaks in customs. Let's begin with that. In health sector, cancer medication, hugely important for people. If you can elaborate on the manner in which people are going to benefit from these tax breaks.
Yeah, if you see the changes which have been brought on customs duty rates, you will see a pattern. And the rates have been rigid to promote or give the impetus to the domestic manufacturing, strengthening supply chains and creating diversity in the supply chains, as well as for encouraging and giving incentive to the export sector. In addition to that, there was
reduction in gold seems like trying to redistribute, get people to redistribute their asset allocation.
We will go to the gold also, but let me explain the changes which have been brought on customs duty front. So the underlying reasons to look into these budget proposals is that we want to give impetus to domestic manufacturing, boost the exports and provide diversity to the supply chains. So that is again very important. In addition to that, we were noticing that there were certain commodities on which there were upsurge in imports, and the imports were coming at hugely cheap rates. Maybe the exporters in those countries were having some natural advantages because the raw material, maybe say natural gas, was available in those countries at much lesser rate as compared to India. So in those cases, certain corrections have been provided. In addition to that, there were certain items on which there was duty inversion that has also been corrected. To elaborate it further, I would like to say that there are certain critical minerals which are not mined in India, and India was totally dependent on import of such minerals. So there the rate of duty was 2.55 or 7.5%. So there the duty has been brought down to nil, because these critical minerals are now being imported at nil rate for further processing, and these are further used in the sectors like electronics or maybe in renewable energy or defense or space sector.
Batteries, yes.
So it is very important
Just to give a context, so there's semiconductors, there is this EV ecosystem which is coming up for lithium, which is very crucial.
Lithium and space as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so these are the materials which are required by the country for providing in the supply chain, so that India can do the manufacturing and do the value addition within the country. In addition to that, there are items where the supply chain has been strengthened by providing a diversity, because there are certain items which are covered under free trade agreements, and
Yes.
those were already being brought at nil rate or at very nominal rate. So, there to create diversity in the supply chain, and maybe because of the geopolitical situations also. So, there the rate of duties have been reduced or brought to nil. In addition to that, to give boost to the exporting sector, like in case of say frozen shrimp, there is lot of exports from India. So, in that the feed, shrimp feed, so there the rate of duty has been brought down from 15% to 5%, and the inputs which are going into producing that feed, so there the duty rates have been brought down to nil. And giving an example of correction of duty inversion, I would like to mention about MDI, which is a raw material which is not manufactured in the country. India was completely dependent on that for further manufacturing, that is used in manufacture of spandex yarn. On spandex yarn, the rate of duty was 5%, whereas on MDI it was 7.5%. So, that has now been rationalized and brought down to 5%. In addition to that, I would, there are items like mobile phones.
Yes.
And PCBA, which is used in mobile phones and mobile chargers. The rate of duty has been brought down from 20% to 15%. And in fact, mobile manufacture of mobile phone, that is one sector which is a huge success story of the PMP program of Government of India. And under that program, the duty rates were increased to 20% in 2020. But after that, there is a lot of deepening in the value chain, and now the PCBAs, which is adding to, which is accounting for something like 55% of the value of the mobile phone, those are now being manufactured in India. So, that is the way the value chain has now deepened. Now, it is not that India is just assembling the mobile phones, and in fact, in last year the production of mobile phone, domestic production, is to the tune of rupees 4.1 lakh crores, and the exports have also jumped. It reached to the level of 1.2 lakh crores. So, that is there, and you mentioned about the gold also.
Yes.
Now, coming to the gold.
So on the mobile front, I just wanted to add, because it is something, a gadget that everyone uses of a different make, given that the import customs are going to be reduced in the components of mobile phones, will it also have some sort of a cascading impact on the prices of mobile phones in the days ahead? Does that possibility exist? Many viewers would be interested in knowing.
Yeah, so the mobile phones, now the rate of duty has been reduced from 20% to 15%. The models which are not manufactured in India will be available at cheaper rates, and now the industry manufacturing sector has taken firm roots in the country. So, there is a need to provide or to bring down the duty levels to the normal level, because the rates were increased under the PMP program to boost the manufacturing sector. And now we have to create the competitiveness for the industry, so that they can be very competitive in export market, and which is already happening.
Right.
So that is on the mobile front.
You were telling us about the precious metals as well.
On the precious metals, I would like to mention that on gold, the import duty, basic custom duty was at the rate of 15%, which has been brought down to 6%. And in fact, the last time when the rate of duty on gold was increased was in July 2022. At that time, because of the geopolitical situation, there were worsening current account deficit on count of, mainly on count of increase in crude oil, petroleum crude oil, that reached to the level of $120 per barrel. That was leading to worsening of, so CAD, and therefore the government thought that non-essential imports that have to be curbed and curtailed by raising the rate of duty. In fact, that resulted into reduction in the volumes of gold import in the country, and in the financial year 2022-23, the CAD reached to the level of 2% of the GDP, which came down to 0.7% in next financial year, that is in financial year 2022-23, in fact 23-24, and in fact in the last quarter of the last financial year it was in surplus. So, the position on CAD front is, and in fact I would also like to mention that when the rate of duty was increased on gold, we noticed there was a tendency to bring the gold not always in bullion form, but in other forms like in jewelry form under certain free trade agreements at nil rate, and that was a kind of subterfuge used for bringing the gold at concessional rate or at nil rate, that was also resulting into that country was not gaining commensurate to the rise in the customs duty. And there was increase in, we noticed that there was increase in gold smuggling, and in fact last year customs authorities have seized something like 4.8 tons of gold. So all these factors weighed in, and in fact the biggest factor is that gems and jewelry consumes lot of gold for manufacturing of jewelry which are exported, and they provide lot of employment also. The employment provided by gems and jewelry sector is to the tune of 50 lakh people are getting the employment in that sector, and the exports from that sector is again accounting for 8% of India's exports. So that sector is very important for providing employment.
Where we value add to the raw material of these precious metals.
So precisely for that, for them, the now material will be available at cheaper rate, gold. So all these factors weighed in for taking a decision to bring down the rate of duty on gold from 15% to 6%.
And India is known as a processing plant for precious metals, and I think it would get a further boost. Mr. Ravi Agarwal, startups we understand are important engines of India's growth story. There is a proposal to abolish angel tax for all investors. If you could simplify for us what this tax means and what does its abolishing means for the startup ecosystem in the country.
Yeah, so basically this was a tax on that if the share premium, the investment in the startup was more than the value was more than the fair market value, then the differential was subject to tax. But then there were a lot of caveats, and there were a lot of relaxations that had already been provided, keeping in view the requirements of the startups. And so there was never that was an intention that we actually dissuade or discourage startups in this context. But then somehow the impression was that this provision was actually hindering and was coming in way of growing of the startup industry in the country, which was never the intention, of course. And therefore it was felt that we may do away with that, because ultimately what is important is that the investment should come, the startup industry should grow. So in the context of that, this tax has been removed. The apprehension was...
Do you think that this is the only problem where investments into startups is concerned? Because the bigger problem is that capital has become more expensive, and that is still not, that situation is still to ease.
Yeah, so that is one aspect. You see, the other was that, well, of course this was for the startups, but what about entities which are other than startups?
Yes.
So, right? And so basically from the tax point of view, so long as the funds are coming from the disclosed sources, then it is fine with us, right? And if it is not, or if it is something like a money laundering or something which happens, then there are other regulations which may kick in. So that way it is basically a balance that one is trying to make. And perhaps we hope that with this the startup industry would grow and we will get more investment.
And another, of course, tax which has been reduced, which I am not sure if it comes into your regime, but the corporate tax on foreign companies,
Yes.
their income,
Yes.
their profit. So do you think, what was the thought process behind that? It was
has
simple
been
rationalization, or are we really saying that, look, we've reduced the tax, come and invest?
Yeah, so there are two things. One is that, of course, this has been reduced from 40% to 35%. So this would encourage investment and the foreign entities to invest here. The other was that we had also reduced rates for domestic companies.
Yes.
And at that point in time, we had not normalized these rates. So this was the time to actually bridge that gap. So that is also one of the intentions.
I just want to, because it's also the time when a lot of direct taxpayers are paying their income tax. This is the month for many of us. We've compared the new and the old tax regime several times, but there's still people who have to file their tax, and they're still comparing the pros and cons. Something that you want to share with them, your thoughts on the manner in which the two tax regimes are positioned at the moment.
So this new tax regime is basically a default regime.
Yes.
So once you actually log into the system, the first which is suggested is the new tax regime. The new tax regime I would say for a common taxpayer, it is easy to actually comply with, because there are no, taxpayer need not bother about the deductions and all those claims. It's a straight sort of computation which happens, so that becomes easier. Of course, from a tax perspective also, it is beneficial to the taxpayer, and that is why, as I said, 2/3 of the taxpayers are actually opting on their own to go into this, to opt for this regime. So we are very confident that going forward this would get more traction.
And the new tax regime has just been made more attractive. There's a standard deduction as well, as the finance minister mentioned, from 50,000 increased to 75,000.
That is only for the
new tax
people
regime.
who opt for the new tax regime. Even say, this increase from 10% to 14% in context of NPS, that is also available for the taxpayer who actually opts for the new tax regime. So that's also an advantage in case a taxpayer wants.
And for the old regime taxpayers, I guess the NPS for minors is proposed to be introduced as well. So that might benefit them.
So that is another thing. But yeah, so but for an employee, if there is an employer-employee relationship, at present in the case of private employment, this 10% is what is admissible. Okay, so that has been increased to 14% in case the taxpayer opts for the new tax regime. So that deduction under section 80 CCD subsection 2 is available for taxpayers who are opting for the new tax regime.
Okay.
And this additional 4% is also admissible to them.
All right. Thank you, sir, for joining us, both Mr. Ravi Agarwal as well as Sanjay Agarwal, for talking to us about these comprehensive changes that have been made in the tax regime, both direct and indirect, and let's hope that the country benefits the most from these changes, its people, as well as the way the country is run, its growth prospects as well. Thank you.
Thank you.